So, back to this. Yeah, I mean, don't really know what to say. It's been quite a while, since I've done a black screen video. I think the last one I did was Reverie Chapter 3. Uh, Again, kind of anticipations and, expectations, which was like at least a few weeks ago. But yeah, that was the last one I did. And now I'm doing this one, and I'll do one on just getting this out of the way real quick. Again, you know, um, between one on Pursuit AU for a Mori, which will be interesting. But again, for this video, right? Right, you can kind of tell by the title, Uranium Thoughts, Opinions, and Review, right? Again, you kind of saw us coming. In case you didn't know, right, or I've been watching, I've been playing through Pokemon Uranium, right? And I had just finished it. Finished specifically the second Elite, or not Elite Four, the second championship round in fighting, spoiler, right, our rival Theo at the end, right, and beating him. So with his fucking level 80 team, right, my level 70s, I just got lucky that I won. But again, being him, right, that was kind of, again, I guess, what would you call it? That was sort of like the pinnacle or peak, the culmination of like events for that game, right? So again, there might be more post game stuff. Again, the big thing being that, in case you weren't aware, the post game is incomplete and unfinished. So or just the game's incomplete. So it's like, there's stuff that I want to do that just isn't a part of the game yet. Again, Angalore Village just doesn't exist. So the post game stuff that is in there, thereby also doesn't exist, right? But again, something to where, and I could have, again, I said I would look up post game stuff to do. I didn't. That's just because I was focused on Civ, and now it's like, okay, I'm gonna get busy soon, so I won't really be able to have time to do these. Um, but again, something to where it's like, yeah, at least in terms of that. So I just figured it was better just to make this video and get it out of the way, right? So, at least in terms of that, right? Yeah, so that's what that comes down to there. But there's that. So with that out of the way, right? Again, I can kind of just get into the nitty-gritty of it, right? Thoughts, opinions, and then overall just like kind of review of the game again, because this is a normal thing I do, right? I did it for Insurgents, did it for pretty much all the other games, just a video to kind of get my thoughts and opinions out of the way, more so than an actual review, and something to where I talk about a lot of this during the actual game and gameplay. So, but again, right, just still want to make a video like this to get them all just in one place, right? So, and again, come up with some new ones as well, right? So, just talking about that. So, with that, right, I guess we can just get into it. So, as per usual, again, generally what I've been doing for these is I've been going over the cons first, because they're almost always less cons, more like, because you have pros and like benefits and cons, like critiques, right? Or like pros and like, what would you call it? The good parts. But again, something where like generally most of the games I play have had less cons. I'm not that picky when it comes to it. So again, I'll just do them to get them out of the way first, and I talk about the good parts. So cons for Uranium, right? Things that again, drawbacks. What would you call it? Critiques, things I didn't really like about the game, and this in no particular order, just kind of going through. Um, I'd say the first thing, and this is probably the biggest thing, is that it pretty much, and this is the main thing, right, is that it took way too long, in the game to kind of get to, not really the villainous team, because there isn't one in the game, but more so again, to get to that part of the game revolving around, I guess the quote unquote antagonists, right, and then dealing with that there. Yeah, again, just pretty much way too long to get to there, right? We didn't get there until after like the sixth gym, and then we had that encounter at Larkspur Labs. So, which I can kind of go more into. Again, I didn't dislike, what they did, right, with the whole Larkspur Labs, Urain Curie, tying that into the incident 10 years ago and ultimately what happened. And then kind of moving forward from there on out. That I didn't dislike. It was that it took just way too long to get into it, right? So it just, again, took way too long to actually get to that point. And I had been saying it for like pretty much like, honestly, for a string of like 5 or 6 episodes straight. I was talking about like, oh, we still haven't encountered, villains team yet. We still haven't encountered, the antagonist yet, right? And then, at that point we encounter Larkspur Labs and Uranium Kiryu. So that's my first big, con, probably the biggest one that I've been mentioning the whole time. Because it's like, here's the thing. So at the very beginning of the game, you learn kind of, again, you actually get, you learn about the story, right? And you learn about the incident that happened 10 years prior, right? Specifically what happened with that. You get, the flashback and cutscene of that, right? So it's something to where, again, you see that, right? And then you're dropped in, and then it's like, okay, you are, what's it called? The son or daughter of, you know, again, the fucking professor there, right? Or Dr. Lucille's her name was. And then, like, yeah, she died in that whatever incident, nuclear meltdown that happened, supposedly, right? And then that your father, Kellen, he kind of buried himself his work, so you're with your grandma. And then pretty much from there, you're dropped into the game, right? And it's like that's pretty much what happened over the past 10 years. There's not a lot else to go off of, but that's pretty much what happens. And then you go down your adventure. I like that, I like that because I feel like it's pretty compelling, similar to like Insurgents. Again, there's going to be a lot of comparisons to Insurgents in this video, where you're kind of dropped off, and you at that Insurgents you literally know nothing about yourself because you had your fucking brain wiped and you're an occultist base, right? But in this, it's like, okay, you have very limited knowledge. You have just baseline knowledge on what happened in the instant 10 years ago at the whatever nuclear meltdown and what has kind of happened since then, and again, you kind of going off on your own now. So that I enjoy, but something to where you get that at the beginning and it takes so long to kind of develop off of that, right? To, capitalize off of that, right? Um, Again, and it's something to where you get to, here's the thing though, you get to visit one of the nuclear plants, and it's something to where you get to, what would you call it? You get to read some of the papers that were left there, right? Which paint more of a picture, right? And a more of a complete picture. And instead of, oh, it wasn't a nuclear meltdown, right? It was a secret, project, right? Around developing artificial Pokemon that could harness, that could be the key to harnessing, limited and limitless and unlimited energy, right? And you learn that again, is something to where, yeah, what would you call it? Yeah, it was Codename 92, and that our mother, Dr. Lucille, had developed a connection to it, right? And that's something to where it's like, yeah, and then that along with it developing sentience is what caused the project to terminate. I enjoyed that and learning more about the story there, and that was around, I think, the point of like the fourth, maybe even fifth gym. But it's something to where, and you do that, right? But then all of a sudden, and this is the big thing that I think was like a missed opportunity. You had the two nuclear meltdowns, right? For both nuclear plants, Epsilon and Zeta. And it's something to where, you pretty much just end up fighting nuclear Pokemon. And it's something to where it's like, I think they could have done more with that, right? It's something where it's like, again, I got to capture one of the nuclear Pokemon, actually utilize it, which is pretty cool. But you already had, access and exposure to nuclear types in the wild or in the grass of nuclear plant Epsilon. So it's like, it's not the only way to get them. And it's just something to where it's like, I really feel like it was kind of a missed opportunity because it seems like it kind of happens. You have two full nuclear meltdowns, like legit, like explosives, like legit, two out of the three nuclear plants in the region are down. And it doesn't really seem to make a difference. It doesn't really have an impact on the rest of the game up until, you get to that third one, right? And it's like, okay, like, did these even really happen? And I even mentioned, something, it's like, I mentioned this during the gameplay. What would be cool is after, the first and second nuclear meltdowns, that those areas or cities or whatever became like inhospitable and you couldn't go back to them, or if you went back to them later. That would have been really cool. I would have really liked to see that. But again, it's something to where, and again, I think finding those pages and getting more backstory in the incident, right, and more context there and getting more information on that was pretty cool. But then they kind of just threw the two meltdowns in there and you fought some nuclear Pokemon, and then, like, again, nothing ended up happening or coming of that, right? It didn't really have an impact. And that's just like, I mean, okay. And then you freaking go all the way to East Tandor, and it's only when, again, you get to Larkspur Labs, do you actually, after the sixth fucking gym, do you actually, again, fill in the rest of the story, get the bigger picture right, figure out what happened, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with Uranium Cure, right? From that point on, again, it's just something to where it took way too long to build up, and I think again the remedy for that, because I'm gonna offer my solution, right, is again do something like what I would have said with those first two meltdowns. Like we could have had a Uranium Curie interaction at Zeta, right before it melted down, or it could be like I said, where all of a sudden those areas became irradiated, and you need to like, let's say you came back to them later or something. So there was at least some sort of payoff. But again, right, it's and it feels like it has some sort of impact, but again, it's something where it's like it really doesn't, which is like okay, that's I'd say my main con, my main critique, right? Sort of the main drawback I think is that yeah, it just took way too long to get into that aspect inside of the game. Again, it did a good job, keeping up with the gym leaders, right, and gym battles. It did a good job of keeping up with your rival Theo. Fought him so many fucking times, right? Probably more than any other time. And again, that's not a bad thing, right? There are even some times where it's like optional, but again, it's just that's the main thing is that it just takes way too long to get into that aspect or side of the story. So again, right, what else? So that's the first thing, right? Second thing, and this is again, more of a minor thing, right? Is again, and this is yet again coming from just nuclear, or what would you call it, uranium itself, just the game, right? The first one was more fundamentally related to the story. This one's more fundamentally related to game mechanics, right? Again, what would you call it? Something to where, yeah, like you probably know what's coming, right? But basically, again, and this is something that I've said throughout the game, is that nuclear types just aren't really viable. And again, it's something I hate to say, right? But they're just not really viable, and that's something to again, like and these are two again, there are more pros than cons, right? But I'm gaining in critiques or drawbacks. But these are two big ones, and they're like fundamentally related to the game. The first one to the story, this one to the game's mechanics, and again, sort of a function there, right? It's just nuclear types aren't really viable. Again, it's like it's something to where like it's something to where okay, so you capture the nuclear type, right? So okay, you got a nuclear type Pokemon. Congrats, right? And again, you look at the nuclear typing, and the strengths are it's 2 times effective against every type except steel, and then nuclear, which is half. Which I think is good that they have steel as a counter, right? Ironically enough, it again not just for what would you call it? Not just for uh, just real life purposes, right? But also, again, for just, actually having a viable hard counter to nuclear type, right? So that isn't too overpowered. But the drawback, again, being every other type is 2 times effective. So, again, right? That's something to where, what it comes down to there is that, yeah, it's just something to where it's like, okay, that's not the issue, right? And I was just getting that out of the way, kind of explaining the nuclear. Another thing being that nuclear types don't obey you. That's not the issue. Like, again, with the whole strengths, weaknesses, even them not obeying you, that's not the issue. The issue is nuclear types can rarely learn any nuclear type moves unless it's an organic nuclear type. Like, for example, I caught 2 nuclear Pokemon. Nuclear Trapinch, I think, or no, it wasn't Trapinch. I don't even remember. I caught 2 nuclear types. One of them didn't even have any nuclear moves. The other, Nuclear Gyarados, only had 2, and only one of them was an attack, right? And again, this is something that I brought up is that, the strength being nuclear moves, if they can't learn them, right, or rarely do, again, unless it's monotype, what's the point, right? Again, it's like, because you're only taking the weakness, which is being everything being 2 times effective against it, and then also just, again, what would you call it? And then also just them not obeying your orders. So it's something where like, again, we ended up making Nuclear Gyarados viable. I'm not gonna say it didn't work out in the end because we were able to make it viable through Mega, right, to power it up even more, which it was only one of 3 Mega Nuclear types. And then also at the end of the game, being able to actually cure it, of its nuclear like stasis, and then making it actually obey you, right? But again, something to where that's kind of the issue because if that only comes about post game, then what's the point of actually adding one to your party during the game, or at least that late in the game? Again, it's just something where it's like, and it wouldn't be an issue if they had like, let's say more, like let's say if their nuclear moves replaced like their normal moves. I feel like that would make sense, but it seems like they just added in nuclear moves that, again, like nuclear gyarados only learn two, and it's like, okay, well, again, I basically have it for just one. Uh, Again, right? I basically have it for just one single move, and it's like, is that really worth it? I don't know, but that's my second main con, drawback critique, right? And this last one, it's more of a minor one. Again, those two are fundamentally related to the game. One to the story, one is mechanics and functions. This one's one for minor ones that I didn't like. I saw what they did with the championship, right, and made it a tournament style rather than just Elite Four into championship battle. And again, it ended up being 5 battles anyway, 4 battles, and then a battle with Theo, right? Again, it's something to where it's like, with that being the case, right? You know, it's something to where, yeah, what it comes down to there is that, yeah, it's something to where it's like, I see what they did, and it mimics the anime, and it was a breath of fresh air, right? It was refreshing. I'm like, oh, this is how they're doing it. No Elite Four fight. But again, I think my issue being so, okay, instead of the Elite Four, you just have a set group of trainers that you end up cycling through, right? Some of them literally are just normal trainers. Some of them are gym leaders, right? And then you have the championship, which is scripted against Theo, right? But again, it's something to where it's like, so basically they did the inverse of what Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon did, where they have the set champion, right? But then, what would you call it? Like kind of circuiting Elite Four, inverse of that, right? Where they had to set Elite Four circuiting champion. But again, something to where it's like, again, fighting off against random trainers, right? It's like, again, I see what they did there is breath of fresh air and refreshing, but personally, I would have just rather had an Elite Four because I feel like, again, it's something where like it elevates them, right? To where it feels like a more important battle. Even if, again, and this is an issue Pokemon's has, that the Elite Four don't actually do anything during the game. It's legit only during like Diamond and Pearl and then Black and White where they actually do something. But again, it's something where it's like, at least having, again, right? Again, at least it's something to where it's like, at least they have an elevated status versus just you fighting right. That is something I would have preferred. I will say though, I did like how it was, rather than not being able to heal between battles and needing to use items, instead they made it to where you couldn't use items but you were healed between battles. That feels a lot more fair, and it also feels a lot more what would you call it? Less gamey and gimmicky than just like, let's say, spamming items during a battle. You actually have to have a team on hand that can beat them without items. So that's something I did appreciate. But again, overall, just having a tournament style, again, I would have honestly would just rather had a Elite Four, but that's kind of minor compared to the R2. But again, that's honestly it for cons critiques. I didn't really have anything else, again, for that, but what's it called, right? Again, the first two were the big ones, and those are more fundamentally related to the game itself, but that last one was more minor. But yeah, now we can get into the pros. Again, I'll say, so pros, right? First pro, right, benefit, thing I enjoyed is that the region is almost entirely composed of new Pokemon. Again, I had a team full of new Pokemon, and it's something they pulled a Black and White, basically made their own roster, and that's something that I really like appreciate, respect, and enjoy, especially since I enjoyed using some of them. Again, it's something to where it's like, really enjoyed that there, and it's something to where, again, like versus like Insurgents where they didn't have any new Pokemon, they just had the Deltas. I mean, it's like, yeah, so, but it's something, again, not saying that's a bad thing on Stern's part, but on this, they literally make their whole roster, which is, again, and as well as having the nuclear type as well. I'll add that to it. Again, it's something to where I really enjoy that there, and that's something I really respect, especially since, I was able to actually use them, and they were viable, so that's the first thing, right? And that can't be, understated enough, right? Or overstated, I don't know. Again, that's just something that's like great, right? And then that's the first thing, right? Second thing, and this is probably a second, again, story, right? Again, critique being it takes way too long for it to pick up, but again, right, or more so to actually like learn about it in game. Again, Insurgents had the same issue, but the difference being that that's just due to the length of the game itself, not just waiting way too long in the actual story to pick up. But again, the story itself, once it picked up, right, I enjoyed it, learning about Larkspur Labs, learning about Urane, Curie, right? Again, right, Urane, Curie, learning about, what would you call it? Again, the backstory, learning about, piecing together what actually happened during the incident 10 years ago and things that followed. So, again, I really respect the story they had there, and that was something I really enjoyed. I think, again, it was simple, but it was effective, and it was something that worked, right? It didn't need to be this grand villainous team, right? It just needed to be, this one group that was shady group organization, right? Almost like, I want to say it's akin to Team Rocket, but more like, again, just an individual, like more so a group of people rather than like an organization, right? Larkspur Labs. Funny enough, they use Team Rocket grunts, but and then again, the whole Urane Curie thing. That's something I very much enjoyed too, right? So, again, also can, again, even though it took too long to pick up, right? Once it did, something I enjoyed, right? There's that, right? So, third thing being Theo, our rival Theo. Again, I really enjoyed what they did in the direction they went with his character. Again, right? It's like I made compared him to like Barry from Diamond and Pearl, but obviously his character actually undergoes evolution, right? And his character is similar to Damien, but again, their kind of arcs diverge, right? As to where Damien from Insurgent, spoiler, becomes a human Deoxys hybrid, and you have to fucking fight against him and bring him back to normal. Instead, Theo is someone who, and this is the big part where his character picks off from, is when he supposedly loses his father, and again takes second fiddle to us one too many times, and again he needs to kind of show up and like prove himself there, right? But that's something where he kind of realizes that at the end of the day that doesn't really matter. He's his own person, right? It's like he shouldn't be comparing himself to us. And again, it's just I definitely think it's such a great character, but like for a rival, but then also definitely one of the most like realistic ones. Like Insurgents, I hate to say, the rivals are pretty unrealistic, right? I mean, you have Nora, who's an our like mystic, what would you call it? Who has an our mystical Pokemon who just kind of appears out of nowhere, but like has all this knowledge on it, and it's never really explained. Kind of guides us and then fades out of relevance. I hate to say. Then you have Damien, who's the like sort of abandoned, son of a fucking cult leader, right? And then again ends up scathing away for the rest of his life. Manages to actually go on the journey with us, but then gets fucking kidnapped and turned into fucking, again, this, I like how much more down to earth it was with that rivalry, and it's something where we also face off against him so many times, which again is something I enjoyed, because I wouldn't have enjoyed it, let's say, if some of the parts weren't optional, but once the battles did become optional, something where I actually enjoy, because it's like, okay, I can actually, if I do it and then fucking like lose, then that's on me, right? But there's that. That's also something I really enjoyed, right? So, but beyond that, right? Again, so that's the next thing, right? And again, I'll say kind of the last thing, right? The last thing, right? And this is again kind of to end it off. I really like the design of Tandor, right? With the whole West Tandor, East Tandor. Again, I like the design of Tandor, and again, just in general, right? Something to where like let's compare it to Insurgents. I like Insurgents' design, right? But that was because they mostly had it like split off. Like you had the main region of Torn, you had the Western region, you had or whatever the R region was. You had the Dream World, right? And you had like, again, so yeah, and you kind of tour around the island, right? With Tandor again, it's much more like, so you have West Tandor, but even then, it's like very like, it's not linear at all. It's only linear because you can't access certain modes of transportation, right? And then you go to East Tandor, right? And you see, again, it's smaller, but I think that makes sense, right? It's something where you explore there, right? And then come back. Most of the story happens in East Tandor, right? Again, it's just something where it's like, yeah, in terms of, I like the design of Tandor. I think they did well for that. And that's, again, one of my favorite Pokemon games are Black and White, right? But the big critique of that game is that the region design's pretty weak, right? I mean, just being honest. So again, something to where it's like they kind of fixed in Black 2, White 2, but the region design was very weak. That's something that this game doesn't fault on. So again, that's another thing. And I will say, like, that's kind of the last thing. But again, all these pros, and again, they outweigh the two main cons, which is just, took way too long for the story to pick up, and then also, again, what would you call it? Nuclear types just not really being viable compared to, like, how great the story was once it picked up, freaking, what would you call it? Them creating a whole new freaking Pokedex, right? Again, just what would you call it? again, the design of the region I just mentioned, there was one more, and it's that again, what would you call Theo's arrival? Again, it's such a great rival, but so they definitely outweigh the cons. And kind of, I guess, finishing thoughts, wrapping it up, right? Because I actually need to kind of go do something. I enjoyed it as a fan game. Again, I will say I didn't enjoy it as much as Insurgents. Granted, that may be biased because that was my first one, but the big thing being, and I even said this, if they would have killed Theo off, if they had the balls to do that, I would have put it higher than Insurgents. But even if, like, let's say, if they actually made parts of the region irradiated from, like, the fallout of, like, a meltdown, right, in, like, freaking explosions, that you had to, like, leave and then potentially come back later, that would have just elevated it to, like, Insurgents level, right? And it's something to where, like, especially if, like, let's say, freaking, because Cameron and then Kellen, like, they got extreme radiation exposure and they were just fine. Same thing with, like, Theo. If there was actually, like, lasting impacts, obviously Lucille, right? But that's because she was fucking Curie, right? Again, it's something to where, like, if there were actual lasting impacts, I felt like it would have put it at Insurgents level, if not higher. But again, because there weren't, I feel like it just doesn't take it to that level again. Still enjoy it, just not at that level. And again, the big thing there being that, and this is kind of what I'll say. Again, it is something to where the reason why I played this to begin with is it was one of the most premier and notable fan games out there. It's one of the first ones that came out. It's the one that got in legal trouble with Nintendo. Funny enough, right? But again, it's something to where I think the game, as one of the first, and most premier and notable, I feel like it does a solid job. Like, honestly, in with kind of how short it is compared to, like, Insurgents. Like, I think I spent, like, what, 35 hours in this game, maybe 40. Insurgents, I've got, like, fucking over 100, right? And it took, let's compare parts. It was 35, 36 to beat the entire game in this, right? To beat Uranium. It was 70 for an Insurgents, and then another 40, or 70 for the main game and another 40 for the post game. So Insurgents is just way longer, right? So it's something where I think what this game does a good job of is introducing others and people to, Pokemon fan games, right? Like the community, right? Without it being like a ROM hack, not needing to worry about that. You just get the game and you play it. I think it does a good job introducing there. It's something to where I would recommend people play this first, like the inverse or what I did, this first and then Insurgents, which is more, again, longer, you commit more, right? But also I'd say overall better one. But again, it's something to where it's like, I didn't do it because I needed all that time to finish Insurgents, but now, again, I don't have as much time, so I can play the short ones. But it's like, that's kind of what I stand behind, what I think. But again, with that, we're reaching 30 minutes again. Next video will be Pursuit AU. That's going to be a fun one. But something where, like, yeah, just need to make this video get out of the way because it's like, okay, this game. Need to make this, again, post-game, who knows if it's going to be complete, probably not, just being honest. But there might be some more stuff they didn't do, but something where I'm not going for, like, a completionist run. So it's like, yeah, whatever. I mean, not worrying about that. So with that, I guess I don't really got anything else. I'm just gonna end it here. So yep, that's it for this one. See you in the next one.